Good morning, or good afternoon. That tells you how disoriented I am. On behalf of Ambassador Marianne Peters, our CEO of the Carter Center, Jordan Ryan, our Vice President for Peace Programs, and all of us here at the Carter Center, and of course, President and Mrs. Carter, I welcome you to the Carter Center's Human Rights Defenders Forum, our 10th forum since 2003. We welcome our guests here in Atlanta and from all over the world who are watching online. Hello, everybody wave, yay. We're very happy to have you participating in this vital and timely conversation. We have with us some of the world's most effective and courageous human rights defenders and peacemakers. Those in Atlanta have already been meeting for the last 2 days, engaging in deep discussions about the challenge of overcoming the politics of fear in this long struggle for freedom for all. We have with us human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, former government ministers, at least one. We have religious and traditional leaders, peace builders, international human rights organizations, and representatives of the United Nations human rights bodies. Tomorrow, we will speak remotely, or by remote, with the Foreign Minister of Sweden and hear from the representative of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Assistant Secretary General Andrew Gilmore. We are seized with the urgent need to address the increasing erosion of human rights in the context of overly militaristic approaches to national security and the failures of the neoliberal economic order that has left too many of the world's peoples behind. Over the next 2 days, we will highlight some of the most pressing threats and challenges facing those leaders, all of you, and all of the others scattered in every corner of the globe, who put yourselves and put themselves at the advance guard of the struggle for human freedom. And we will also highlight some of the promising strategies and recommendations for action that will move us from fear to solidarity and hope. In a moment, we will hear from our founder and leader here at the Carter Center, former President Carter, who will begin with his reflections to start us off today. Next, we will have remarks by Maina Kiai, who has just recently left his post as UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Assembly and Association, and will give us the benefit of his 6 years in that mandate on the challenges that we face. And finally, we will hear from Brian Dooley from Human Rights First, who will give a report of the weekend discussions in summary form, which is not an easy task, so thank you, Brian. But first, as we always do at our forum, we will begin by feeding our spirits, by enjoying a musical performance by Atlanta's own Phyllis Adams and Lilia Bolden. Now, welcome to Miss Adams and Bolden.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is our pleasure to be here and stand before you, who all of you are on the front lines of being human rights defenders. And for this, we say thank you. We don't take it lightly being here. Thank you so much for what you do.
President Carter, we welcome your remarks.
Now can you hear me? Okay, I've heard Leontine Price and a lot of other famous opera singers rendition the Lord's Prayer, but I never heard anything that good. That was superb. I say this prayer at least once a day, and I'll remember that when I say it the next time myself. Well, I think everyone remembers back in 1941, if you were born, I was in high school in 1941 when Franklin Roosevelt outlined the 4 freedoms. And one of them was freedom of religion, freedom to sing a song like that. Another one was freedom of speech. And then he gave 2 warnings, freedom from want or poverty or hunger, and the other one was freedom from fear. And those freedoms became the foundation for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They came about, as you know, right after the Second World War, when for the first time, only time in history, so far as I know, the world got together, the leaders of the world, at least those who had triumphed in the war, and decided to have peace with the United Nations and to declare in 30 very simple paragraphs how to put those freedoms that Franklin Roosevelt outlined into practice. And a very practical 30 brief paragraphs. Unfortunately, we haven't realized those dreams of peace, which is one of the foundations for human rights. War brings about an automatic loss of human rights, and want is the same thing. In the year 1999, when we were preparing to start a new 1,000-year period, new millennium, in 2000, I was asked to give 2 speeches. One was in Oslo, Norway, and the other was in Taiwan. And both of my hosts asked that I say in my speech, what is the greatest challenge that the world faces during the next new millennium? And I decided that the greatest challenge was a growing disparity or difference between the richest people in the world and the poorest people in the world. And that applies not only to individual human beings within a country, but also between countries, among countries. The recent departure from the faith or trust that we've had in democracy and freedom, in safety, in our fellow human beings within a country, in our political leaders, in the sanctity of truth, in the sanctity of marriage, and many other things in which we have always believed almost automatically, has come about because of the lack of adherence to the high ideals of peace and human rights in their broadest possible terms. The Carter Center tries to promote both those things. We don't try to define human rights narrowly, just freedom of speech and freedom of religion, but we think that people ought to have a human right to food and to a place in which to live and to a moderate degree of health care and to the right of children to expect a better life than their parents have experienced. Simple things. We have had, as Karen has pointed out, a series of these meetings. One of the earliest that we had was to comment upon and marshal our forces against the deterioration in human rights that was brought about by 9/11 in the United States. I think that was the beginning of the deterioration in our own country of a deep and almost universal commitment to human rights, when personal freedom and privacy and the right of prisoners and the adherence to the Geneva Conventions and other international laws was almost sacred. And they became doubtful. We resorted to torture. And we found that our own private communications were no longer private. And we've seen what we feared come true, where when the standards in the most powerful militarily and economically and culturally nation in the world go down, there's kind of a pent-up desire on some leaders in the world, some governments in the world, who have been held to a high standard before. Now those standards are not held so highly. And in the last few weeks or days, we've seen the leaders of the United States announce that no longer will we try to have as one of our key foreign policy commitments the holding up of the standards that have made our own country and others admirable and trustworthy. So we're assembled here today and this week with a group of human rights heroes who come from 31 countries, I understand, including, I think we have about 10 people here from the United States, who have experienced in various forms these challenges that I've just described. I really, when I was a young man listening to Franklin Roosevelt or engaged in the Second World War, the Korean War, I never dreamed that the United States of America would cease to be the most admired democratic country in the world. But I'm afraid that has happened. And many of you who come from other countries know this happened even worse in your country, in the Congo region. I understand in Kenya. Is Mumby here? Where is she? So I want to express my condolences about your brother. And I hope that this group will just take under advisement what has happened to your own family, Mumby, and what's happening in Kenya. And I'll join the group in doing what I can to make sure that your family in the future is safe and other families as well. And I'm very sorry about your brother. I also know that Julianne Assange, I see her over here, from Congo, right? You have access to the United Nations Security Council, I understand. But it hasn't been a successful access, is that correct? When you try to get something done about terrible human rights abuses in your own country, particularly against women and girls. Again, I think the purpose of these meetings is not only to share experiences, as terrible as some of them might be, but to let us understand that there's a common opportunity or challenge or obligation or duty of all of us collectively to join together as a team. A small team here, of course, with just a few, less than 100 people perhaps, but in the long term, to let our influence in our own countries, including mine, be felt in the future to help prevent any furtherance of a deterioration in commitment of human beings to human rights. that's not an easy thing to say or to do. I've called some key senators in the Foreign Relations Committee in the United States, for instance, and I know that a few of you, chosen by Karen Ryan, will be going to Washington after this is over. And they are waiting with great anticipation to hear from you about what's going on in your own country as well as in our own. And we hope through that process and through the media, which is here today, and through the audience that we have in various ways, to expand our own individual influences as much as we possibly can. The Carter Center will be a dependable partner with all of you as we address the problem of violations of peace and violations of human rights. And you can depend upon that. So we look forward to learning all we can from you. I've already read the statement that you prepared, and we'll all adopt the entire statement, but also various parts of it, and try to make sure that some of the fears that we all feel here about our fellow human beings, and perhaps some of us in our own families, will not be realized. And if we can deteriorate or reduce the right which is being lost to be free of fear among not only ourselves and our acquaintances, people we influence in our countries, but the entire world. It's a big challenge, but I don't have any doubt that we have the right approach to it. We have standards that we will not let be deteriorated. We'll hold our standards high, and we'll continue to have faith in the things that have always been keys to our own existence. When I was inaugurated president, and later when I was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, I quoted my high school teacher, Miss Judy Coleman. I'm the only incoming president who ever quoted a teacher. But she used to tell us students, we must accommodate changing times, but cling to principles that never change. And that's been kind of a guiding statement for me throughout my life. We must accommodate what's happening now, make the most of it, improve it if we can, but never default on our commitment to the principles expressed in the Lord's Prayer and expressed in our own ideals and constitutions and so forth, which never change. And I think those things that never change include a commitment to peace and a commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I'm very proud to be a partner with all of you as we learn more about each other and about the challenges that we face, and resolve together with, I hope, courage and tenacity, never to give up until those hopes and dreams are realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, President Carter and Mrs. Carter, for bringing us all here today, and to Ambassador Peters and Karen, and for all the staff and the good work you've done over the last few days. And we're really grateful to be here. It's been a great time, and it's been a moment of learning. And let me also just start off by first paying tribute to all the human rights defenders who came before us, who many of whom are not here, and some of them who have died. There are portraits around the center that are remembering and commemorating the people who have died. And I think it's good for us to pay tribute to them, some who are good friends of ours, and the fact that they have paid with their lives a heavy sacrifice, a big price for the cause of human rights. I think that's an important thing for us to. Let's just give a round of applause for them, please. And I want to thank you, Mr. President, and Mrs. Carter for giving us this space. This, as for many of us who do human rights, the name Jimmy Carter is a big reminder of the first of the first moment when human rights was institutionalized within American foreign policy. And it's a great moment then for us to come here and reflect and to pay tribute really to the courage and the dedication. After all we have seen in the United States, it really is almost, it was a challenge, and great that you did that to bring human rights into the forefront and try to push it to become a key value and a core of U.S. national and foreign policy interests, even though sometimes it hasn't quite been at the forefront, but at least there is the aspiration to make it one of the key values for U.S. foreign policy. But this is a space for thinking and a space for reflection, and also a space for celebration. And I think that for those of us who have been here the last few days, there's been great moments of networking, of touching base with each other, and really of learning. And I think there's nothing more that we can say as human rights people, nothing more important than learning from each other and learning from our peers, learning new experiences and new strategies and new tactics as we face the challenges of human rights in a very, very different world than many of us remember. I've been asked to talk about my time as Special Rapporteur on freedom of association and assembly. And I've just finished a week ago, and so I did 6 years of that mandate. And one of the most important things I think for me is that I just learned. I learned a lot, and this is a moment of learning, and I was privileged really to have a front row seat in many of the struggles that go on across the world. Across the world, in many countries, people struggling, and I was amazed and still am amazed by the resilience, the determination, and the creativity of human rights defenders and civil society people, always thinking ahead, trying to figure out how they can push the cause that they care about and move on. I think that is something that is really one of the most amazing things about human beings, that no matter what goes on, human beings have a deep desire for freedom and dignity. And no matter how many restrictions you may put in law, in practice, no matter how many people you jail, no matter how many people are killed, human beings will always fight for freedom and for dignity wherever they are. And these times are difficult times for sure, because these are times that many could not have foreseen even 5 or 6 years ago. The fact that we are at a point where intolerance seems to be key, where we have made normal what was previously abnormal. Statements and feelings and approaches that were completely hidden before are now out in the open. And maybe that may be good, that may be bad, but there's something that's changed in the fabric of life across the world. This is not about the global north or the south or the east or the west. This affects every country, every person in the world. The levels of intolerance that exist. The idea that if I don't agree with you, then I should kill you, or at least jail you. That if you criticize me and I'm the president, then you must go to jail, or as they're doing now in Uganda, they're calling a critic of the president, they're calling her insane, and they're taking her to mental institution simply because she thinks the president is wrong. And we have seen a world where fundamentalisms of different sorts have taken center stage. We often talk about religious fundamentalism, and it is a big issue for us. It's a big issue across the world, because fundamentalism makes you not like the other. But I think one of the most fascinating fundamentalisms for me is market fundamentalism, where people believe the market is God, and the market can do whatever it is, and we worship money. And we give up everything to the altar of money and profit. That even prisons are now a profit-making enterprise. And this country has led the world, together in the United Kingdom, led the world in privatizing prisons, which means more and more people are going to jail, because the only way the prisons can survive is having more and more people in them. So in the world where we are trying to change the world and have a better world, we are making it harder. So from privatization, market fundamentalism that says and tells us that workers should be paid as little as possible so that the shareholders and the owners can make money. In a world where the gap between the lowest paid worker and the CEO has dramatically increased, that it is absolutely abnormal. It's not right. And now we are going to a point where there is going to be a challenge on the right to strike at the ILO. About 3 years ago, the employers wing of the ILO tried to change and tried to force the right to strike, to say that workers do not have a legal right to strike. It's not a legal right. They were defeated because governments joined up together with trade unions. And that was the time when the American government really, under President Obama, led that challenge and said, no, the right to strike must remain a right. The employers are going to bring that up again now, because they believe that with this new administration and the new regime in the United States, there's a possibility that the US government will support the employers and finalize and finish off the right to strike. It's a worrying thing, because if workers cannot strike, if people can't come together to collectively bargain to improve their lives, there's no need for them to be working. So we talk about, and one of the things that I found fascinating is that this is the only country that I know of where the right to work, the phrase right to work, means the right to have less pay. It means the right not to have trade unions. Nowhere else in the world is right to work understood that way. The right to work means right to get a job, to get a decent pay, to get good living conditions. But in the US, in southern states, and one of the things I found when I did mission to the United States, Mr. President, is that the Nissan factory, the Nissan company, has got about 14 plants across the world. The only two that are not unionized are in the United States, in Tennessee and Mississippi. The one in Brazil is unionized, the one in South Africa is unionized, the one in France is unionized, the ones in Japan are unionized, except the ones in the United States. That says a lot about where we are going. And I think your point about the United States as a model shrinking in front of us is a very real thing. And I think the task for Americans who are here to bring back America and bring back that model that many of us who do human rights started on is crucial. There's a big task ahead of you all, and we will work with you, we'll support you as much as we can, but I think you have got a big job ahead of you. The crisis we have in the world is not new, and I'm glad you take us back to the 40s and in those old days where, for those of us who are alive just slightly after that, can remember quite well that we have had crises before in the world, and we have overcome. And yesterday we spent some time at the Martin Luther King Center, which is always very illuminating and very uplifting in many ways, because we see the resilience of people, and we see the resilience of leadership, but the resilience of courage and people pushing and moving on and learning. And I think this is the thing now as we're going on. It is time for the South, people from Egypt who have gone through fascist regimes, to teach Americans and teach Europeans how you face fascism. Sometimes you lose, but sometimes you win. People from Zimbabwe to teach us all, how do you survive 32 or 36 years of a fascist dictator? People from Chile, how do you survive all this? People from India who have got all these struggles that are impossible sometimes to even understand. But it's a time for our people to learn from the South. And this is the time now that can happen. And we look forward to this center taking the lead on teaching that learning from the South to the North for once. I think that's an important part of it. But it also means that those of us who work in human rights, those of us in civil society, human rights defenders, we have to learn as well. We have to learn to do things differently. Yesterday, I think a lot of us were very impressed to learn how the ACLU has adjusted its work from those days of the last 20, 30 years. And it's no longer an organization that does litigation on First Amendment rights. It's broadened and it's got organizers. It's working differently. I think the challenge for us, and we're learning here the last few days, is that we need to also change, and we need to also move away from symptoms and move into the root causes of why these things happen. We have done pretty well, I think, as a human rights movement, as civil society, in moving our programs and our projects forward. But they clearly are not enough. They're not fit for purpose anymore. Things have changed. We have to also start adjusting to figure out how we do that. And I think that challenge is for all of us, because we've all got comfortable in the way we do things, and we've got to find a new way of dealing with these things in a manner that actually helps us tackle the root causes rather than the symptoms alone. And in that we are taught, and as our colleague from Black Lives Matter told us yesterday, we have to be guided by principle, by a creed, by values. And so as we change our ways, we must remain true to those values and that creed. And I think the one thing that I would like to see, and I've been saying this, Mr. President, in the whole meeting, that we have to start seeing our work. We have to move from seeing human rights as a project and see it as a struggle. And I think for those of us, again, who see the civil rights struggle, we see it as a struggle rather than a project. We look at the history from 1955 when Martin Luther King led the march, the Montgomery bus boycotts. And well, in fact, interesting, we were talking about this yesterday. We said that had Martin Luther King gone looking for funds and was told you must have outputs and indicators, he began marching in 1955. His first deliverable, first output was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 10 years. But the process in which he was working was fundamental, was wonderful. It was a necessary part of the struggle. Today, as we sit here, Mr. President, we keep going back and being told we have got 6 months, 1 year to deliver an output and a deliverable. And I think there's something that we have to push back as human rights defenders. We can't keep accepting it. We have to push back against some of the things that are going on where we know we are much more competent at competing than collaborating. And part of that, Mr. President, is because there are all these fantastic things called calls for proposals. And we all compete with each other because once the call for proposal, we are in a competition mode. We're not going to collaborate. And it makes us, each of us, weaker rather than stronger. So we've got to start thinking how to do that. And we have learned here in Atlanta, the home of Martin Luther King, that this is a long struggle. It's not going to be resolved in 2 or 3 years. It's a long one. But the process of that struggle is probably more important than the outcome of that struggle. And we would like your help there, Mr. President. So I'm here today to say one thing. We need your help. We need your help, Mr. President, because we would like you to convene a meeting of all these donors and donors at the policy-making level, whether they are private donors, bilateral donors, international donors, to sit with civil society and human rights defenders so we can have a frank discussion about how we can work better. Some of the practices and the policies of some of these donors are inadvertently hurting us. They're inadvertently making us compete. They're inadvertently making us short-term. They're inadvertently making us project-based. And so we are losing our organizers and hiring good proposal writers. So our offices and our staff are proposal writers and planners, but they're not activists to go out and manage to organize people. We need your help, Mr. President. We need your help. It can be done. It's something that needs your convening authority to bring the policymakers from both, as I said, private, bilateral, international, multilateral, to sit with us and discuss. We accept that it is inadvertent. We don't think it's a deliberate policy by these donors to make us weaker, but they are and they're making us weaker. And the only way we can ever move forward, the only way we can ever succeed in this, and the only way we as well can change is if those who support us also change. So for those groups that are funded individually, the ACLUs, the Human Rights Watch, you can get individual donors. Maybe they don't have the problem, but the vast majority of organizations depend upon these bilaterals, private philanthropists, and international donors. And for us to be able to achieve, we will need to move forward. So I would like to end there, Mr. President, saying, please come to us, come to our aid. And the people here and outside will tell you many, many stories about how they've been trying to do something and they're stopped they're stopped by the donors saying you cannot protest. I have had an experience where, and I'm happy to say this, the UNDP said to me once that you cannot use UNDP money to organize a protest. And I said, but that's a human right, isn't it? I said, yes, but it's against the government. I said, yes, but that's a right. That's what rights are about. So we need your help. And please bring UNDP into the table as well so we can have the frank discussion with them. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Maina. President Carter, Mrs. Carter, friends. Thanks for this marvelous gathering here over the last couple of days. Speaking after Maina, I feel like I'm walking onto the stage after Adele and suddenly realizing I can't sing a note. But we wanted to try and give the general spirit of our discussions here over the last few days. And this afternoon and tomorrow, defenders are going to share their individual thoughts and experiences a little more directly. While we work in sometimes very different contexts, as we've heard over the last few days, our conversations here have often reflected a common experience of the new normal. We've heard how on every continent we are experiencing rising fears, threats, new risks in what has been achieved by those who came before us and what we've won for ourselves. Much of what we have shared in the last few days is familiar, problems we've faced for many years. Marginalised people still face severe oppression. Violence against women and girls continues unabated in all cultures, enabled by regressive religious and political institutions. Women human rights defenders remain under intense attack, and we are vilified, isolated and stigmatised for our work. But we won't be deterred. We recognise this new situation, the rise of populism, illiberalism and authoritarianism, has changed our world. We see how the world's economic order is failing humanity. When a handful of men own as much as half the world, this is a crisis. Market fundamentalism has resulted in policies that favour the extremely wealthy over the poor. We've heard examples of how the exploitation of fear is fueling xenophobia. Political leaders are destroying generations of progress on rights in the name of national security or traditional values. Whether our colleagues here are from Europe or Africa, from Asia, the Americas or the Middle East, much of what we've heard these past few days is alarmingly familiar. Those we thought our allies are disappearing. Media has sometimes been turned against us, and our situation is too often met with indifference or worse. But we share too a hope when we witness the response of public engagement in so many countries, as millions of people are rising up to protest the new crisis. They are part of the new movements refusing to be intimidated into silence, refusing to succumb to despondency. We've discussed how, with them, we will overcome fear and offer a new vision of our work, of our rights. We've heard that when we become detached from our communities and are not relevant to their lives, we become more vulnerable. But that when we connect with them, are part of them, they offer protection to human rights defenders under threat. We've heard too how some of us are exploring collaboration with new constituencies of how to work with business and faith leaders. We've discussed the enormous differences of context to our work, that some of our governments aren't open to conversations with us or are just too dysfunctional to engage with us at all. Whereas elsewhere, there are opportunities to engage with political leaders and to push them to turn away from a language of fear and of hate. We've talked about how part of our new normal is enabled by media distorting truth and pushing a fake news agenda. We've heard how journalists continue to risk their careers and lives in promoting human rights. And we have shared ideas on how to support them and to encourage them to cover our work in a responsible, truthful way. Many of our conversations, whether people were chatting informally in twos and threes or in the larger sessions, gravitated to the pressing need for those who fund our work to adjust to the new reality. We spoke about how we're ready to work with philanthropists and others to chart longer courses together, to invest together in the future and to work together in a long-term struggle rather than a short-term project. We discussed the crucial need too for the United Nations to rethink and reform its work. While we value the importance of our many allies in the UN, we also see how NGOs are being denied accreditation and shut out of decision-making and deliberation at the UN. Human rights defenders trying to engage with the UN mechanisms are being targeted with reprisals. While the Universal Periodic Review and other human rights mechanisms have been developed over many years, proper implementations of recommendations is rare. We need the UN too to examine itself to become fully transparent and accountable to those it represents, recognising it's not a private club of governments, but a servant of the world's population. Our conversations also recognise that the new context is not just a time for action, but also for self-examination. We spoke about the need to accept some uncomfortable truths, including that our base is too narrow, that we need to show the effects of our work better and more often. And we need to offer people an effective, persuasive, positive vision of dignity and rights for everybody. We told each other too how to find new alliances, how to be more imaginative than we have been before. Locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally, we need to find new partners for support and new ways to support each other. We also said we need to better understand and engage with those protests and movements which are resisting the new populism and the mainstreaming of intolerance. That it's time finally to break out of our silos, find out who else shares our values, and work with them. It's time we collaborate more closely with the labour environmental movements. We must explore where business and governments might be allies and not adversaries, work with religious leaders and communities who share our vision, approach financial institutions, find and learn how to work with new friends. We also need to be secure in our communications with each other and protect ourselves from and counter the new onslaught of propaganda. A little more specifically, we discussed how we need governments and political leaders to reject legislation or other efforts that seek to restrict or obstruct our activities or our rights in the name of national security or economic progress. We were reminded over the last few days too how common it now is for human rights defenders to be branded as terrorists, as criminals, or as foreign agents, and how we need political leadership to help keep us safe and protected, how governments need to refuse to promote an agenda of hate and fear and not to use the language of national security to suppress rights. We also spoke about our pride in recognising many journalists and others in the media as human rights defender colleagues, how their work has sustained our movement for decades and continues to expose violations and promote freedoms and rights. Many journalists have been murdered for their human rights work, and others continue to operate at great risk. We need to continue to support their work and need them to support ours, and we should offer to help them to cover our work in a responsible, ethical, truthful way. But the alarmingly powerful rise of a media that distorts the truth and offers fake news is a major part of the new crisis. We need to help those in the media to refuse to push an agenda of fear and to help to establish a responsible, credible press. We're ready to work with journalists, artists, filmmakers, bloggers and others to counter the false reality being pushed to communities across the world and understand the benefits of working with younger journalists to help cultivate a longer-term culture of human rights. Nowhere is the need greater for a major rethink in response to the new normal than with those who resource our work. As Maina has outlined already, much of our discussions has centred on the need for an expansion and restructuring of the current philanthropic community. As core members of civil society, we believe philanthropists should regard and support our work as part of a long, large struggle and not as a project. We recognise that the work of philanthropists is also threatened by the new attacks, and we need to adapt together to overcome this assault. We ask funders to develop flexible, core, long-term funding commitments to those working with local communities, especially women-led organisations and movements. Funding policies that withhold assistance due to an exaggerated concern over contact with terrorist groups is self-defeating. If these local efforts are not supported, terrorism will rise. We spoke too about private sector actors and how they can be allies in the promotion and defence of human rights. We have seen technology companies speak out against harmful immigration policies. We discussed the power of the private sector to promote rights in its behaviour and recognise the potential value of contacts the private sector can offer us and of the potential of consumer choice. We need to draw the private sector in supporting our work with financial resources, with pro bono work, with advice and with access to power. These rich and sometimes intense discussions over the last few days led us to resolve to break the fear by staying engaged and staying connected. Some of us are veterans of human rights conferences, and I've often heard the same things being repeated year after year. But there is something new happening in the world, and these past few days have shown that we are starting to adjust what we do to counter it. We didn't find the answers here to stop the new normal or to end the frightening new populism, but we showed in our formal discussions, in our presentations, and in our chats over coffee, we are starting to adapt. we reminded ourselves that we have endured dark times before, that we found ways to free ourselves from fear in the past, and that we will again. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And for those of you who haven't seen, we haven't circulated the statement, but Brian went over most of the statement, which really I think does a very good job of crystallizing the conversations we had. One thing I did want to emphasize also on this matter of funding, I was truly heartbroken yesterday when my dear friend Julianne Lusenge told me that the wonderful work that she does and others, other women-led organizations, and she can obviously speak for herself later, but because she won't brag about herself, I will brag about her for a minute. You know, Julianne supports women in so many ways and peace. You know, sometimes if there's a trial that needs to be organized for a woman who has been raped, it's Julianne who runs and picks up the judge and the police and the witnesses and the victims and takes them to a place where there can be a trial because the state itself is not functioning. This is the quality of the activists that we have here, and Julianne is such a dear friend. But she told me yesterday that all the resources have dried up for this work. And that just broke my heart. And a few years ago, Julianne came with us to Washington, D.C., and she told, I think it was Senator Cardin, if I remember, it was in that meeting, and she tried to explain how the funding problems affect their work. And to Maina's appeal to us, I think it's very difficult, and you're right, this isn't an intentional harm that the donors want to do well. They want to support this work. And because of legislation and fears of terrorism and fears of corruption and all of these fears that the donors have, these hurdles and obstacles that are put in the way of local grassroots organizations getting the resources they need are having this grave consequence. But I wanted to add to what Brian said by saying that we also discussed the possibility and the potential of local fundraising and local support. That Julianne also mentioned, and others mentioned, that when the community stands up with the activists, sometimes the resources come from the community itself. One of our previous participants from a previous year, Fatima al-Bahadli from Basra, Iraq, with $5,000 that she raised locally, disarmed 500 militia fighters and put them to work rebuilding homes and roads and schools with local money. So we know that there are ways, but we know that there are huge gaps. So I just wanted to highlight that. And since we have a little time before our break, if anyone who was over the last weekend wants to we have our own, the next sessions where we will continue to talk together, but if there were any additions or comments or emphasis that we missed between our opening remarks, I invite anyone now to speak now or wait till after the break. And if not, if I don't see any flags go up of immediate comments, then we may be able to go to our break. But Julianne, thank you for offering to speak. Can you, before Julianne speaks, she'll be speaking in French, so can I ask us to get our headsets ready so that we can hear and appreciate Julianne's remarks. And I believe that French is on channel 3. English is on channel 8. Français, c'est numéro 3. Espagnol, c'est uno. And Russian, which I don't speak, is number 5. English is on channel 8. So turn your dial to 8 and turn up your volume. And let's see, do we have the interpreters online? Yes, wonderful. I hear English. Thank you, Julianne.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Karine.
Indeed, and thank you very much,
Carter. President Carter for gathering us here. It's my second visit to this forum. I came with the traditional chiefs, with a pastor, and the participation in this forum has transformed these chiefs. They went home and they understood the fight for women. The pastor is evangelist, he's Protestant, but he does everything he can to unite all the churches in the town and city to talk about the women's issue. This is to tell you the efforts that you accomplish here are not done in vain. It does give us the fuel to continue. I arrived here at immigration. They asked me, why are you coming here? What are you here for? I came for the Forum of Human Rights. For who? And I tried to explain with my limited English. It didn't work. I showed the invitation. And the gentleman looked at me. You're going to meet President Carter? And I said, yes, I am going to see President Carter. And it's not the first time. I will meet him for the second time. And you give us that energy. He finally accepted, but I feel very pushed around. So there's something that needs to be done at that level, immigration-wise. There is a lot of aggressive language and body language. But this will not discourage us. We will keep on coming. Like Karine said, I went 3 times to the Security Council. I talked about DRC and the issues we have there with more than 20,000 men on peace mission who cannot restore peace. Each time I finish my speech, everybody congratulates, everybody applauds. And I told them, I do not need your applause. I want specific action to put an end to the war in DRC. The current situation, President Carter, President Kabila does not want to leave. He wants to bring us back to violence. We ask you, please, write personally to President Kabila to have him stop manipulation, instrumentalization of armed forces groups and all the rest, and leave power peacefully and let democracy move forward. We have suffered enough with our children. Women have been raped. Children are included in these armed groups, and it's not easy to get resources to help survivors. We have a hospital with more than 900 people coming per month for healthcare, for violence, sexual violence, AIDS, sexual transmitted diseases. But it's not easy for a small organization to get funds. We need $500,000 per year. It is not easy to mobilize and get all this. When I come, I look for donors and they look at me and they say, but why did you accept this monster? MSF from Switzerland gave us the hospital. If we had not accepted the hospital, it was going to be closed down. So we accepted to take over the hospital, but we lose sleep over that. We have lost sleep. I am absolutely exhausted, but not discouraged. With my colleagues, we work night and day to transform survivors and ask them to become activists and advocates to fight and say no to war. And the women from Uchuru that went this past month to face the armed forces and groups to say enough. Get out of the places you are and go back to the villages. Why accept this? And they acknowledged that. They said, yeah, we suffer here, we don't live well, but they ask us to stay here, and the ones who ask us to stay where we are people from Kinshasa. They are MPs, and they asked women to organize a meeting so that all the groups from Shuru can talk, get into dialogues. And we have our own funds. We get bits and pieces of money here and there, and we directly gave money to these women to organize these meetings. It happened. Some young people returned to the villages, and we have sensitized them to accept them giving them a warm welcome. But now we have to give them work because they're there. So now what? What do we work on? How are we going to stay busy? If not, we'll go back to the weapons. So there are tons of things to do. Thank you for your speech and for the interventions of all our colleagues. I believe you have a lot to do with other presidents who follow your example. Abandon the power. What witchery forces them to hang on to power forever and kill others, to mistreat others? Thank you so much.
Maria Mejia. Thank you very much. Push the button.
Hello? Now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen. I feel so honored and humbled to have you here, President Carter, Rosalynn Carter. It's so wonderful to have you here again. Marianne, Jordan, all of you, thank you very much. I just wanted to urge you to strengthen our alliances and commitment to the defense of women and girls' human rights. I have always thought that my dream is to see a society where gender equality is real, where we Catholic women can express a different view from that of the institutional church without being stigmatized. We would like to see a society where women's rights are honored and respected, and thus women are able to make their own choices in all aspects of their lives, including their sexual and reproductive rights. I'm taking President Carter's word. When half of the world's population is not consulted on important decisions and policies, it is no wonder that so many problems persist. We take also your words to have the courage and tenacity to continue our struggle until these dreams are fulfilled. Thank you very much.
Christina and then Lisa. There's a little person talking on the button. You can see there's like, it looks like a face, and there's some noise coming out.
Looks like Wi-Fi.
It looks like Wi-Fi, yeah. So maybe everybody take a look at your microphone to see where to push when it comes your time.
Good afternoon. I'm Christina Palabay. I'm from the Philippines. I'm a human rights defender working on monitoring and documentation of human rights abuses. And the other day I was in a taxi. The taxi driver asked me where I am from. And I told him I'm from the Philippines. And he said that, oh, your president is a lunatic. And I was like, okay. And then he said, our president here too is. And I was like, okay. And then he said, why are you here? Well, I'm attending a human rights defenders forum. And he said, okay, that's a good thing. And he said, but why are you here in America? I said, I'm not here because of your lunatic president or my lunatic president. I'm here because of your people and my people. And I was here for the past 3 weeks. This is my 14th state. It's my first time in the US. And I'm glad that this will be the high point of my visit here, because we are asking the American people to help us in stopping the US government to fund wars in the Philippines, to stop funding the drug wars, to stop funding the wars against human rights defenders and activists in our country. And I think that's a more beyond lunatic presidents. I think that's the strongest form of solidarity that we can have from people like you, from everyone in this room. And of course, governments work or may not work, but I think it's the people's solidarity that can continue the struggle, probably without funders, but of course, funders are always welcome. And this President Carter is one message that we have discussed in the past 2 days, that we have to strengthen the solidarity within us, among us, and in various ways and forms that new alliances can be formed. Thank you.
President Carter and First Lady Rosalynn Carter, it is a huge privilege to be here in the room with you today. I don't know, I know I haven't really spoken about this very much. My name is, by the way, Lisa Sharon Harper. I work with Sojourners in Washington, D.C. I bring greetings from Jim Wallace. Yes, I'll give him that thumbs up. And I also wanted to let you know I campaigned for you when I was 7 years old. I walked our neighborhood with my mother in Philadelphia, knocking on doors saying you have to get out and vote for Jimmy Carter. And I want to ask you now, because the Voting Rights Act has been gutted by our Supreme Court, and the impact of that Voting Rights Act being nullified in many parts was felt in drastic measures in this last election. We now know that in one state in particular, 300,000 people are likely not to have been able to have voted, who would have been able to vote had the Voting Rights Act been in full force. And we know that in that state, Donald Trump only won by 30,000 votes. So if you can lift your voice in concert with people like Representative John Lewis and others who are pushing Congress to restore the power of the Voting Rights Act, I believe that would be one of the most impactful things you could do in these years. And the second thing is, just even today, as I've been Facebooking about this gathering, I've been getting questions from my own evangelical friends. I'm a Black evangelical. And they're asking me, well, what is human rights? Doesn't God give rights? How do governments give rights? If you could speak from your faith about the reality of the responsibility of governments to protect the rights that all humanity is given because we are created in the image of God, that would be a huge help to the work that we are doing to organize people of faith. Thank you, President Carter, for all of your work.
Thanks, President Carter. My name is Hadar Harris, and I come all the way from San Francisco. I want to follow on with a little focus on our American experience of human rights today. And I'm grateful, so grateful, for the opportunity for us to gather, to learn from our colleagues, to work with our colleagues around issues of human rights globally, but also the fact that today we face such challenges around civil society space in the United States, human rights issues that have existed for forever in the United States and its application in the United States. But today, this morning, John McCain had a very powerful op-ed in the New York Times, really strongly advocating for human rights principles to guide the work and exercise of the United States in its relationships. Missing from that, though, is the application of human rights here at home. And the fact that what we see already is a shrinking and closing space for civic engagement and activity with the promotion of anti-protest laws in more than 20 states in the United States since November, in the fact that people are being prosecuted for laughing at Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearing, or the FCC is investigating late-night TV hosts for their jokes. Those are indicators that we've seen everywhere else around the world, an authoritarian playbook that we see playing out. And so in addition to this strong stance that we have to take to promote and protect human rights globally, we have to be watching very carefully at how space may be shrinking here in the United States as well. So I hope that in your conversation with Senator Sanders tonight, maybe you both can address those issues, and that as we move forward, your voice, Senator Sanders' voice, and the voice of leadership within the United States will also focus on these issues as well. Thank you for your leadership.
We have time for the remaining folks who want to speak. I'm going to start with Rahana, then Mohammed Sharif Diop, and then Najla, and then we'll go to a break.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and Mrs. President Carter. I'm from country Pakistan, which is not suffering after 9/11. I'm the country from where, since Cold War, we are the people who have been suffering. And I am representing over here women peacemaker and women human rights defender over here. And most of the time, when it comes to peacekeeping, there are some expert who doesn't know about language, who doesn't know about our culture. They come as a peacemaker. We who knows about our language, our culture, and there are many around the world, like over here we are 100, why we are not involved in the peace missions, why there are peacekeepers or the peace experts who are from, we don't have that degree or that language, but we can speak people's language. And we have been dealing with the communities, and we are having peace in our communities where there are many conflicts. So we, with this honorable center, I really request, if there is any initiatives, to have more women peacemakers into these missions where it goes, so we women can understand how women and children are suffering after war, whether it's in Bosnia, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Congo, wherever there is, we women feel same pain because we give with the same pain birth to the children. Thank you very much.
Push the, you see, yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much.
Put your earpiece on.
Juste une parole de remerciement.
I would just like to thank President Carter for gathering us here again, but in another fashion. I have been attending several times this forum, but this time the participation is different from all previous one and the ones in other forums. What we generally see in meetings for defenders of human rights is aggressivity, is autosufficiency, self-sufficiency. It's saying that we are the ones who need to change the world. We are the messiahs. But in this assembly, I've noticed that there are some question marks. And the new movement that Mr. Brain is mentioning, we have already started it. Because during these past 2 days, we have been asking ourselves, the other who doesn't share my opinion, is he my enemy? We asked ourselves, how can we work with a government which is trying to oppress and violate human rights? How can we work with the mercantile world? How can we handle this? So by acknowledging that we cannot be in the world without the community, and that all the aspects, all these segments and layers of that community, from the one who is oppressed to the oppressor, everybody needs to participate in this change. I think that From that moment, from this moment, we have entered a new dimension, another vision, and this is the dimension which can allow the defenders of human rights to put milestones, to move forward. Michel Ali said so. Social changes is not a revolution that happens by miracle. It's a long-term process. We need time. We put the milestones. We have the seeds that are sown, but who will harvest that? Maybe one generation, maybe 10, but at least we will be proud enough to say, I was there. I put the first piece, the first stone. I participated in the process of thinking to change things. And maybe people will remind and remember, without them, it would not have been possible. We saw it here in this room. The ones who sacrificed their lives, who made this possible with their efforts and sacrifices. So we need to continue with this effort and dynamic, and I am extremely grateful to the Carter Center, President Carter, but also for all those who are present here. This is different from all the other ones. People are wiser. This time we thought, how are we going to bring this change? As long as we don't change ourselves, we will not be able to change what is beyond us. So we need to change ourselves so that things can also change. Thank you again, President Carter.
Hello. This is my privilege also to be here, Mr. Carter, and also First Lady Rosalynn Carter as well. One of the issues that I would like to highlight, I know that this is part of our statement already, but one of the things that I'm coming from Afghanistan, and I have been living all the time during the jihadists, communists, and Taliban and all of these periods. Only almost 2 years I'm here in the United States. So one of the reasons I would like to just highlight that unfortunately the women's issues in Afghanistan is not coming, it's going away from the top of agenda that we had, particularly after the 9/11. But now the space is very shrinking, particularly bringing the most volatile warlord of during the civil war in Afghanistan, Hekmatyar, into the power. Now, he is making lots of statements against the woman presence in Afghanistan. So this is something that I would like to mention, that extremist groups are getting into the, unfortunately, into the power, systematically doing harm to the, not only women's rights, but as a whole human rights. Like for instance, yesterday, one of our religious scholars, he was a writer, he was an activist against terrorism, against extremism. He was assassinated by fatwa of some religious or extremists in Kandahar. So this is so sad to hear all of these newses, and we really think that we really need these allies of human rights defenders whenever they are. I am, as an Afghan woman activist, I would like to just emphasize, if any of us, and particularly you, having lots of credibility of your work and your background defending human rights, if there is any way to do more advocacy around these issues, to become, to do more protection for not only human rights, but also women's rights. And at the same time, as you know, that IS is arising in Afghanistan very badly, and they're recruiting 3 years old and 3 years old boys and girls, and teaching them how to use the weapon. So one of my point is that how we can do more advocacy and work systematically as the terrorists or the extremist groups doing, how we can reach their families, because they are also human. We may do a lot with the families of these extremist groups. Probably we may get a lot benefit from them in our human rights work. Thank you so much.
Najla, that's terrible news. I'm very sorry to hear about this assassination of the scholar. We have, both to Lisa and to you, and to Rahana, President Carter has been in the last few years really emphasizing the importance of defending women's rights specifically, but also, elevating the position of women in leadership, and also the vital role that religion must play. This has been a part of and President Carter's message for a good 10 years, longer than that, but more focused in the last 10 years or so. So this is something that we are committed to. President Carter continues to speak out, so you can count on us.